Last summer, while I was visiting my parents during the holidays, something quite perplexing happened to me. It was around 3 a.m., and I was in my room, engrossed in something on my computer, when suddenly my phone rang. Glancing at the caller ID, I noticed it was my sister calling, a bit odd considering her room was just down the hallway. She could have easily walked into my room if she wanted to talk. I reached for the phone, but the call ended just as my hand touched it. Assuming my sister might have needed to tell me something, I decided to check on her. The moment I approached her room, she started yelling, claiming there was someone else in the room with her. I quickly entered the room, ready to confront the intruder, only to find we were alone. Her tears eventually subsided, and she shared with me that upon waking up, she saw a dark figure just inches from her face, which prompted her scream. When I mentioned the phone call she supposedly made, she was puzzled and informed me that her phone wasn't even in her room. She had been asleep. True enough, we found her phone downstairs, tucked away in her purse. What made the incident even more baffling was that my phone had a log of her call, while hers showed no record of such a call ever being made. This occurrence remained an enigma, one that we never quite managed to unravel. My grandmother always told this true story. It happened during the war in London when my dad was just a little baby. Their home was destroyed, so they had to stay with a friend. This friend had a room for them at the top of her house. One night, as my grandmother was taking my dad up to bed, she saw a mysterious figure on the stairs, almost like a shadow figure. This entity told her not to sleep in that top room that night. So, my grandmother decided to listen and took my dad back downstairs. She told her friend they would sleep in the living room instead. The friend wasn't happy, but said okay. That very night, a bomb hit close to the house. The explosion made the roof fall in, right where my dad's bed was. If they had slept there, my dad would have been in big trouble. This story shows how a strange warning saved them, and makes us think about how special help can come when we least expect it. My grandma was about 7 years old and lived in Germany when World War II was happening. Her town was often bombed, making every day scary. One special night, her younger brother wouldn't stop crying. He really wanted to spend the night at their neighbor's house. Seeing him so upset, their parents agreed, and they all went to stay with their neighbors. That night, bombers flew over their town and their house was hit and destroyed. Thinking back on this story makes me realize how a simple choice, made on a tough night, played a huge part in my family's story. It's wild to think about how close I was to never being here. Back in high school, I had a really close friend who lived next door to a house that no one seemed to stay in for long. It was strange because people would move out in the middle of the night and never come back. For a few years, nobody lived there for more than 6 months. One night, we got super bored and my friend had the idea to check out the empty house next door. We went around the back and found a small pet door that my friend could crawl through to open the door for me. Once we got inside, the house looked pretty normal. It was an old-style house from around the 1950s, kind of like my friend's house, but without any lights on. There was a cool old breakfast table by a big window in the kitchen. We could see the light from a street lamp outside through the window. So, we just sat on the floor across from this table and started talking. Out of nowhere, my friend yelled out loud and everything went pitch black for me. I couldn't see a thing and felt super cold all over. I started yelling too, and suddenly I felt my friend grab my hand and drag me somewhere really fast. Slowly, I could start to see again, and felt warmer when I realized we were standing outside under the street lamp. It was December, so it was weird that it felt warmer outside than inside the house. I looked at my friend and he looked really scared. I was confused and a bit scared too, and asked him what happened. He told me that while we were talking, something that looked like a shadowy figure of a girl came out from under the table and went towards me. He said I looked like I couldn't see and was reaching out into nothing, so he freaked out and pulled me out of the house. Even now, when we talk about it, we get chills. That night, I felt a darkness and cold I've never felt before. It was really creepy. For days after, I couldn't shake off the spooky feeling, and I never walked past that house again. Even thinking about it now makes me not want to get out of bed. Every time I stay at my grandma's house, I hear someone walking upstairs. The sound starts on one side, moves slowly to the other, and then stops. This happens maybe twice each night. I only started noticing these strange noises when I was about 14, after my grandparents moved me to another room on the first floor. Both of my grandparents' rooms are on the first floor too. Let me explain why this creeps me out. I've always felt uneasy about the upstairs part of their house. For some reason, it just scares me, and I've promised myself never to go up there alone. I'm still sticking to that at 23. But there's this one room in particular that really gets to me. It's a long, narrow bedroom with closets on both sides right as you walk in, a bed in the middle, and a window at the very end. My grandparents once told me a story about how the sons of the house's previous owners would see a gorilla coming out of one closet, dance around, and then go back. I didn't think much of it until I had to sleep directly below that room. So, we all went to bed. The house was totally dark, and I was still awake. That's when I heard it. Thump, thump, thump. It sounded like someone was walking from one end of the upstairs room, right above me, to the other side, and then it stopped. It scared me because the pace was so clear and deliberate. I was really scared and went to my grandpa's room. He tried to calm me down, saying the house just makes noises because it's old, and he turned on a light in the dining room to make me feel better. Trying to sleep again didn't work because the noises started up once more, moving across the ceiling from where they stopped last to the door. Just when I thought it was over, the sound began coming down the stairs. The silence in between was terrifying. Now, whatever was making those sounds was on the same floor as me, and the light didn't stop it. Staring at the doorway to my room, with the dining room light casting a glow, my sight started to blur, and I felt really dizzy from fear. I covered myself with blankets. Then, I heard scratching from inside my room, specifically coming from my grandpa's gun case. The sound of something scratching wood and the slight tapping noise it made was really clear. I was so scared I couldn't even scream at first. When I finally did scream, my grandpa came running, but he still didn't really believe me. Doing what seemed like the only thing I could do, I made a little hideout by hanging a sheet over the side of the bed and sleeping under it, wrapped up in a comforter and with headphones on, turning my back to the door. I figured I could ignore anything spooky happening in my room like that. The next day, my grandpa mentioned what happened to my grandma, and she said, "Oh, that? Your cousin got scared once too, saying she heard footsteps." After that, I spent the rest of my stay sleeping under the bed. I've stayed there many times since then, always hearing the footsteps. Now, I sleep on the bed but keep my back to the door and wear headphones. I haven't heard it come down the stairs again since that first night. But if it does, I'd rather not know. When my family and I first moved into the house that would become the backdrop of my childhood, I encountered a mystery that still puzzles me to this day. As a child, I would often be engrossed in my own world, crafting stories with my Legos, when suddenly, I'd catch the distinct sound of my name being called from the other end of the house. It was always so clear, so convincing, that I was sure it was my dad beckoning me from his room. Each time I would hurry to my parents' bedroom, curiosity bubbling within me, only to be met with their puzzled expressions. They would insist that they hadn't called for me at all. This odd occurrence wasn't rare. It unfolded every couple of days, cloaking our daily lives in an air of mystery. I was young, and part of me believed it might just be an elaborate game they were playing. However, one fateful night shattered that notion entirely. As usual, I heard my name. This time, it led me to my parents' room. Yet, the very moment I stepped in, my mom's voice echoed from the living room, inviting me, despite her sitting right in front of me. It was a chilling realization that no game was afoot. Something unexplainable was happening in our home. This secret haunted me in silence, even more so when my brother was found to have partial narcolepsy, a condition sometimes accompanied by oral hallucinations. It planted a seed of doubt. Could I be experiencing the same? Pursuing answers, I underwent medical checks only to be deemed perfectly healthy. The origin of those calls, those unearthly echoes of my name, remained an enigma. Years have passed, yet whenever I return to visit, the night air of that house whispers my name just as it did back then. The mystery of who, or what, has been calling to me remains unsolved, a peculiar chapter of my childhood that lingers in the air of that old house. One evening, while I was still in high school, I was doing my homework at the dining room table. This place in our house let me see the front door clearly. The door had a little glass window covered with a lace curtain. Around 9 p.m., when it was really dark and we hadn't turned on the porch light, I heard something strange. It sounded like someone was on our front porch. Frozen in my chair, I watched as the screen door started to open by itself. It stayed open for a short while, but I couldn't see anyone. It was possible they were wearing all black and I just couldn't see them in the dark. My heart was racing as I waited to see what would happen next. Then, the door began to close very slowly. It seemed like someone was out there, closing it gently to avoid making any noise. I tried to listen for footsteps, but I didn't hear anything else. Maybe the person saw me watching and decided to leave quietly. That night made me feel really uneasy, thinking about who might have been at the door and what could have happened if they had come in. In the deep silence of the night, I found myself awake. The clock read 3:34 a.m. At 17, this hour usually meant I was fast asleep in the safe confines of my bedroom. Yet, darkness enveloped the space around me, and an unsettling noise from downstairs pierced the silence. With caution, I made my way to my parents' room, only to find it surprisingly empty. Where could they be at such an ungodly hour? Concerned, I ventured upstairs to check my brother's room. His room, bathing in the soft glow of his night lamp, was similarly deserted. Convinced that the source of the disturbance downstairs involved my family, I descended the steps, each creak underfoot amplifying my unease. To my astonishment, the living room scene unfolded with two intruders attempting to make off with our television. The absence of my family members added to the surreal nature of the event. In a rush of fear, I retreated to my room, securing the door behind me. The sound of someone trying to force their way in soon followed. The rush of adrenaline jolted me awake, revealing the terror to have been a figment of my imagination. A wave of relief swept through me until my eyes settled on the clock, 3:34 a.m., an eerie echo of my nightmare. Compelled to dispel the remnants of my dream, I crept downstairs, seeking the comfort of reality. However, the nightmare continued to unfold. In the kitchen, I was met with the alarming sight of two men, now yelling at my visibly distressed parents and brother. In a panic, I retraced my steps, securing myself within my bedroom once more. The immediate pounding on my door served as a cruel reminder of the nightmare I thought I'd escaped. Yet again, I awoke, the clock stubbornly indicating it was 3:34 a.m. This time, the lines between dream and reality blurred, leaving me in a state of heightened alertness. Sleep eluded me for the next 36 hours as the haunting cycle of the midnight hour lingered in my mind. When I was a kid, I lived in a really unique house. It stood tall and skinny with 3 floors, a basement, and an attic. This house was special because it had lots of cool things like 2 fireplaces, a shower in the basement, a tiny backyard, and a dumbwaiter that went from the kitchen up to my bedroom. I loved all the quirky things about it, but it was very old. Fixing it up was costing too much money, so my family decided we had to move. Packing up was a big job. I had fun sending my things down to the kitchen in the dumbwaiter and stuffing my closet full of clothes until it was packed tight. While I was cleaning out my closet, I found a door to the attic that I didn't know was there before. I couldn't help but check it out. So, I climbed on top of my pile of clothes and went up to explore the attic for the first and last time. The attic was a surprising place. First off, it wasn't too dark because there were red Christmas lights giving off a soft glow. I could look down into the bedrooms through little holes in the floor. Someone had made the attic cozy for staying in. There was clear plastic over the insulation, a bed made out of a gurney, and some sheets and blankets, and an old fridge that still worked. But the thing that surprised me most was all the bones. Piles of them were everywhere. They were from different kinds of creatures, some big, some small, laid out in piles around the room. 2 of the piles looked like they had been burnt, and there were messages written near them on the wall. The word sorry showed up more than once. Finding this secret space with its mysteries and bones was a big surprise. It made the house even more interesting, but also a bit spooky. That attic had been right above me for 8 years, and I never knew about it until we were about to leave. This story about finding the secret in the attic is something I'll never forget, even now after we've moved away from that unique little house. When I was 8, my family left the bustling urban life of South Florida for a quaint, eerie town in North Florida. The change was drastic, almost like stepping into a scene from a Goosebumps book. Over the 15 years since our move, we've encountered our fair share of peculiar events, but none as unsettling as what happened when my sister moved back in with our parents. Following her husband's deployment to Afghanistan, my sister, now a single mother to a newborn son, found herself overwhelmed. The daunting prospect of raising her child alone in a secluded trailer in the woods was too much to bear. Seeking comfort and support, she returned to the warmth of our family home. Initially, the oddities were subtle, a headboard banging against the wall sporadically. However, matters escalated when she experienced the sensation of being tickled awake by unseen hands. These incidents were easy to dismiss until one terrifying night when my sister's screams shattered the calm. My mother rushed to her aid, only to find the bed shaking violently, as if caught in a tumultuous storm at sea. Despite the fear this unearthly force instilled in them, their resolve remained unbroken. One evening, while my sister was nursing her son, an invisible entity yanked her ponytail, forcefully moving her head. This intrusion provoked my mother to confront the unseen presence with a stern warning, acknowledging its curiosity but firmly forbidding any physical contact with her family. I understand things have changed. There's a baby here now, something new for you. You can look, but you must not touch them. You were here before us, but this behavior is not allowed. Strangely, the disturbances ceased from that moment on. The presence, whatever or whoever it was, seemed to adhere to my mother's command, allowing our family to live in peace. This bizarre chapter of our lives in North Florida remains a testament to the unexplained, a whisper of the unknown that still lingers in the silent corners of our home. A month ago, I went to my girlfriend's place but felt really weird when I walked into the living room. They had put in a big cabinet that used to belong to her grandma, who had passed away a few months before. I never got to meet her grandma because she was very sick and stayed in the hospital. Being around her grandma's cabinet made me feel nervous and kind of sad. I told my girlfriend about how I was feeling, but she said it was probably nothing to worry about. Then she had to use the bathroom, leaving me alone with the cabinet. This cabinet was tall, made of dark wood, and had doors on each side with a glass front. Behind the glass, there was a mirror. As I looked at the little cups and dolls inside, I thought I saw a shadowy figure behind me in the mirror. I called out for my girlfriend right when a scary scream came from the bathroom. I knocked on the bathroom door really fast, and when it opened, I saw her on the floor crying. She said she saw someone in the mirror, too. We didn't even stop to grab our shoes or jackets. We just ran out and drove around with no idea where to go. When we came back, her mom was outside, looking worried. She said she had been seeing shadows moving around. When I was young, I lived in a charming old Victorian house with my single mother. I was an only child, which often meant that the vast, echoing rooms of the house felt even more expansive and lonely. Despite the beauty and grandeur of our home, there was one peculiar thing that troubled my nights: laughter. Not the joyful kind you might hear during a day of play, but an eerie, unsettling laughter that would awaken me from my sleep. I was about 5 or 6 years old when it started. Every so often, in the dead of night, I would be roused by the sound of laughing. It seemed to float through the corridors, a ghostly echo that disturbed the silence. I told my mum about it, hoping for an explanation. She calmly suggested that it was likely the TV left on by accident. Her logical explanations usually comforted me, but this laughter felt too real, too close. Then, one night, the experience escalated. I awoke not just to the laughter, but to a sensation I'll never forget. As I tried to sit up, it felt as though unseen hands were pressing down on my shoulders, holding me in place. The laughter was no longer just an echo in the hall, it was right there in my room, surrounding me. Terrified, I screamed, a cry filled with all the fear a child's heart can hold. My mother rushed to my room, the light from the bedside lamp chasing away the shadows but not my fear. She tried to reassure me, insisting it had been a vivid nightmare. However, when I whispered, "But my shoulders hurt," her comforting narrative faltered. She hesitantly checked, and to our horror, found 2 adult-sized handprints on my shoulders. For years I questioned that night, wondering if my young imagination had conjured up the entire incident. It became a haunting memory, one I almost convinced myself was a figment of my imagination. That belief held until recently when I casually mentioned it to my mum. The color drained from her face as she whispered, "I don't want to remember that." The laughter in the night remains an unsolved mystery of my childhood, a chilling reminder that sometimes the things we try to dismiss or forget refuse to be ignored.